Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Subgenre Sandwich, where each episode we focus on a different subgenre of film and explore what makes them unique. My name is Maxwell, and for this episode, we're asking the question in the back of everyone's mind. Is someone watching me? That's right, looking at paranoid thrillers. So lock your doors, close your blinds, and hunker down, because this episode might have you looking over your shoulder. Also known as conspiracy thrillers, paranoid thrillers are films that, as you might have guessed, carry a major undercurrent of paranoia and focus on characters coming across and becoming involved in conspiracies. It had its heyday in the 1970s with the fallout from Watergate and the Vietnam War looming large over America, and people wanted to know what else the government might be hiding. Now, that is not to proclaim that these films, with one major exception, are accurate documents to what is actually happening in our world, but rather what could be happening behind closed doors. By design, the characters in paranoid thrillers are in over their heads. They're just trying to do their jobs when they stumble onto something that might have earth-shattering ramifications. This means that these films usually share some aspects with adventure stories, actually, as characters are on the run, either to find the truth or to escape those who wish to keep the truth hidden. It's usually both. Political theorist Frederick Jameson's book, The Geopolitical Aesthetic, he states that the figuration of conspiracy is an unconscious attempt to think of a system so vast that it cannot be encompassed by the natural and historically developed categories of perception with which beings normally orient themselves. Conspiracies are a way to rationalize what we think must be going on in the world, because the world can't be as simple as it seems. There has to be more to it. And this is what paranoid thrillers explore, fundamentally. They ask us to pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And even though all the films I'll be covering came out in the 60s and 70s, they are arguably even more relevant today in our post-9/11 Patriot Act, media-saturated climate, where everyone has a footprint. Everyone willingly gives themselves up to be surveilled, whether they like it or not. Although the subgenre had its heyday in the 1970s, an early predecessor of the paranoid thriller is 1964's 7 Days in May, directed by John Frankenheimer, who directed arguably the first paranoid thriller, The Manchurian Candidate, written with a script written by Rod Serling of Twilight Zone fame, and starring Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, and Ava Gardner, three of the biggest actors from the golden age of Hollywood. It follows Colonel Jiggs Casey, that's Kirk Douglas, as he uncovers a plot orchestrated by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, James Scott, that's Burt Lancaster, to overthrow the President of the United States and install himself as dictator. What follows is a tense thriller where Jiggs has to gather evidence to prove Scott's guilt and enlist supporters, and Scott is doing everything in his power to get rid of Jiggs. Some of the finest performances of these actors' storied careers, 7 Days in May is well worth the watch, and is scarily plausible in today's political climate, with strong men rising up seemingly every week. I mentioned at the beginning that only one of these films is based on true events, and that one is 1976's All the President's Men, directed by Alan J. Pakula, based on Washington Post journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's book of the same name. The film details how the two of them broke the Watergate scandal. Probably the best film about journalism ever made, so of course that appeals to me as a communications major. It's rare to get a film that is as meticulous in its depiction of the details of this line of work. We hear every phone call all the way through, we hear every click of the typewriter, every argument with the editor. I don't think there's a single bad performance here, really. Everyone feels very natural, like they're journalists themselves. I suppose it helps to have a rogues gallery of the best character actors from the 50s, 60s, and 70s as your supporting cast. Martin Balsam, Ned Beatty, just to name a few. Not to mention, of course, the leading roles of Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman as Woodward and Bernstein. It's like, blocking, I want to briefly note, is an aspect of film that's really often undiscussed. For those who don't know, it's where your actors actually are on the frame, how they appear. And this is a masterclass right here. Everyone, no matter how far in the background they are, is always doing something. Nobody looks out of place. and yet the frame never feels cluttered, and that's hard to do. Watch any Marvel movie, for instance, and you see those, action scenes where they have 500 characters in there. It's just too much going on. But here, I mean, obviously there's a lot less people, but the frames are always packed, and yet it never feels overwhelming. It always feels very clear what everyone is doing at every specific time. Now, Alan J. Pakula directed 2 other political thrillers. He had a little trilogy. The first one was Klute, which you saw some footage of in the beginning montage, and 1974 is The Parallax View. Now, out of all the films recommended here, this one is the least plausible, I think, focusing on a journalist, Joe Frady, played by Warren Beatty, who uncovers the Parallax Corporation, a covert group that trains political assassins. Although it was particularly relevant in the mainstream conscious following the recent assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK, it still haunted the national psyche. The film at times finds itself becoming far too bleak for its own good, which really draws attention to the fact that the corporation's existence doesn't make much sense at all. It's never explained why they do it. I suppose you could argue it doesn't need to be explained, but in a film like this, I think it does, personally. However, I mean, even if the story, I have some issues with the story, it's a technical marvel. The frequent use of these distant, wide-angle shots give a sense that Frady's always being watched, and turn him into a miniature, nothing more than a pawn to the corporation's whims. And the montage the corporation uses to brainwash potential assassins is also one of the most potent uses of the form in cinema history, I'd say. Juxtaposing happy families smiling and playing in the yard with lynchings and cross-burnings. As the tagline of the film says, it's as American as apple pie. Now, Francis Ford Coppola might just have had the best decade of any director in the 1970s, releasing The Godfather, The Godfather 2, and Apocalypse Now, 3 of the most acclaimed films of all time. But his 4th film in the 70s is often underlooked, especially since it came out the same year as Godfather 2. I'm talking, of course, about The Conversation. The Conversation differs from the other films on the list, as it is the only one that does not feature a massive government conspiracy, but it arguably captures the feeling of paranoia the best. Gene Hackman stars as surveillance operative Harry Call, an expert who is both devoted to his craft, and his Catholicism, such a degree that where religion begins and the spying ends is left unclear. It's a masterful performance, really. Hackman is able to convey such a palpable sense of sadness and guilt that you just immediately felt terrible for him just after watching him for a few minutes. He's just so sad. But anyways, through his listening in, he believes he's recorded a couple's last words right before they're murdered. He's a man already set on edge due to being how good he is at his job, so he knows what everything's capable of, what surveillance is capable of. And his mental state gradually deteriorates as he believes he's being followed everywhere he turns. Whether he is, or if it's all in his head, is left up for you to decide. And the ending shot of him playing that saxophone in his ruined apartment, it just so provocative. It just sticks with you forever. It just pans slowly back and forth. It really is brilliant. Now, the final film we're going to be recommending is 3 Days of the Condor, directed by Sidney Pollack and starring, once again, the inimitable Robert Redford. And it's probably the quintessential paranoid thriller. Joe Turner, a mild-mannered CIA agent, is back from lunch, only to find that his entire office has been massacred by unknown assailants. Turner, as one does, goes on the run, quickly realizes the same assassins who killed his coworkers are after him next. Now, I won't say much more, because there's a twist that comes in fairly soon after this. It's a great one, and it really recontextualizes what we've just been watching. But I'll just say that Redford really gives a great performance here. So does Max von Sydow, the acclaimed Swedish actor. Yeah, you might know him from The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman's iconic medieval Swedish morality tale. He plays the main assassin in that. And that's another great movie. That really is sort of the defining paranoid thriller, I think. But there it is. Yep, paranoid thrillers are a fairly small subgenre, but it's one that always gives me a lot to think about. And I hope you all learned something and got something to think about. If you haven't seen some of these films, I hope it inspires you to go out and watch them. If you liked the episode, please subscribe down below and leave a like if you feel so inclined. Next episode will be on revisionist westerns, so get along now, little doggy. Come on back for that.